So I'm just going to be going over the introduction to grant administration, and this is chapter 1 of our admin manual. So with great funding comes great responsibility. You've probably heard that saying before. So this is just an overview of project administration. So our objectives for this presentation are an overview of CDBG compliance and aspects, as well as the principles and rationale behind those requirements and procedures that we have. So our main contents are rationale of CDBG compliance, the standard procedures, compliance of the national objective, selection of an administrator, grant administration, record keeping and monitoring. So the first one is the rationale of CDBG compliance. So we have 1.1, which is equitable access to economic opportunities. 1.2 is CDBG funds to complement the community resources. 1.3 is the audit trail, which is just transparency and accountability must be maintained at all times. 1.4 is our conflict of interest and separation of financial duty. So that's mainly one cannot self-certify or self-authorize. 1.5 is proactive is always better than reactive. 1.6 is citizen engagement, which is inclusiveness and open access to information. And 1.7 is your outreach efforts are important. So 1.1, equitable access to economic opportunities. So compliance with national objectives. Labor standards, which is Davis-Bacon Act for prevailing wages, the federal and state wage rates. Compliance with Section 3. Procurement standards, so our direct solicitations to minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and disadvantaged businesses. 1.2 is CDBG funds to complement the community resources. So the city or county contributions are through cash match and or in-kind services. Community should maximize the use of their resources first before requesting CDBG funding. The national objective of urgent need is when the CDBG funds are complementing the resources that the community has already used up and they don't have any more. 1.3 is the audit trail, so that's transparency and accountability. So our risk assessment, which Kaylee just went over. Matching funds should be spent proportionally to CDBG funds. Monitoring visits from CDBG depend on the community's risk level. The project file folders should be in order, such as like finance, procurement, public participation, putting those in order to help us find the documents easily when we monitor. Public participation and comments, documentation of in-kind / volunteer contributions. And then records should be kept for 3 years after HUD closeout. 1.4 is the conflict of interest and separation of financial duty. So one cannot self-certify or self-authorize. And the RFF authorizer and the SFMO1 can't be an RFF signer. The RFF signers can't be check signers, and check signers cannot reconcile the bank account. The construction owners cannot self-certify on payrolls, meaning if they're on the payroll, they can't sign off on it. The asbestos / demolition inspector cannot remove the asbestos or be a demolition contractor. The appraiser cannot review the appraiser's work. And the engineering firms cannot handle both engineering and administration on the same grant. 1.5, proactive is always better than reactive. So you have to stay current with your weekly payrolls and Section 3 labor hours. Request for approval, that's better than requesting for reimbursement because there's always a risk that if you ask for reimbursement for unallowable costs, then you won't be getting any money. proper bid documents and contract preparation with legal review, and notify of changes in personnel, financial forms, things of that nature. 1.6, citizen engagement, inclusiveness, and open access to information. So that includes the public posting and the publishing of notices for the public. 2 public hearings, 1 at the time of application, and then the second one is the performance public hearing, and that's at least 80% completion or more. Environmental review to mitigate those environmental impacts on the project. Section 3, contact point for labor and civil rights inquiries. Language assistance, which is material translation and interpretation. And then 1.7 is your outreach efforts are important. So direct solicitations to WEB, MEB, and Section 3/disadvantaged businesses. Qualitative efforts of Section 3 labor hours safe harbor benchmark is not met. Always document your efforts. Number 2 is standard procedures, so responsibilities to help a project be successful. So we have general grant management, which looks like record keeping, financial management, citizen participation, procurement, contract, and property management, closeout, and audit requirements. Environmental requirements, project impacts on the environment, labor standards, like prevailing wages paid to all contracted employees, civil rights, equal opportunity, labor rights, Section 3, acquisition and relocation, landowner, homeowner, and renter rights. Number 3 is compliance with national objectives. So again, we have our different national objectives. So the most common one is the 51% low and moderate income. So we have area benefit, where basically the entire area is benefiting from the project. Then we have housing, which is mainly under our DR and MIT categories. And then limited clientele would be like seniors benefiting from the senior center. And then jobs, meaning LMI persons before employment are identified as LMI, and they will be getting those jobs that are created. Then elimination of slum and blight. We see area basis, so the area is all fitting under that category, so that's more like downtown revitalization. And then spot basis is more demolition. And then urgent need is like an event happens and the community really needs like a project done. So every CDBG funded project must meet one of the 3 national objectives. And low and moderate income is calculated by looking at persons and families with income at or below 80% of the county median household income. So 3.1 is a minimum of LMI beneficiaries. So we have some things that we look at for that. So for LMI housing, we look at the household income. For LMI categories, all the other ones, we look at a person's income. And the project categories that this applies to are community facilities, general infrastructure, water and wastewater, economic development, downtown revitalization, and workforce development initiative. There's 4 LMI subcategories. LMI area benefit, so first you look at the census data, which kind of covers the entire city or county or township. And then you might look at a survey if the existing census data does not sufficiently reflect the current income levels in the area. And so the compliance specialist will look at the survey data at the time of monitoring. 3.1 continue. So our LMI limited clientele, there's 2 scenarios. So the project activities are limited exclusively to just LMI persons, or through family size and income information, at least 51% of the clientele are persons of LMI status. And again, the compliance specialist will verify that. And then LMI housing, so when the CDBG assisted activities result in housing that will be occupied by low to moderate income households upon completion. So it could be owner, renter, occupied, and then the structures can either have 1 family or multiple families. And this is applicable in CDBG disaster recovery and mitigation. And then LMI job creation, so it requires 51% of all jobs are created by the project to be offered to and held by persons considered LMI prior to employment. So it's verified before this is even done. And the total number of jobs created is directly related to the amount of CDBG assistance requested, and it's based on a job per job basis. And so then the compliance specialist will check the data records for the jobs created at monitoring. So 3.2, elimination of slum and blight. So there's two subcategories on a spot basis and an area basis. So the spot basis is when just an individual structure is blighted and it becomes a threat to the health and safety of the community, and that's usually for demolition projects. Then area basis is when the area falls under that definition, and this would be according to local law or state law following 24 CFR 570, and that's typically downtown revitalization projects. 3.3, urgent need. So that's when a sudden event is a threat to the community welfare. So that could be a flood, COVID-19, a tornado. So the recent origin, it had to have developed or became critical within the last 18 months. The community is unable to finance the activity, so they need our funds to help with that. And other sources of funding are not available to carry out the activity. So you have to try to get funding from other places first. Number 4, selection of an administrator. So the salary paid from CDBG funds must document time spent on the grant with relevant records. So that could be payrolls and timesheets. So there's 3 options. The 3 options are you have somebody on your staff already that you want to administer the grant. Another option is you hire like a temporary or part-time person to administer the grant, or you hire a third party, and that would be an RPC or a private administrator. So like I said, the first option is the community manages the grant itself. So there's an advantage to that. You kind of already know what the goals are for your community, so you can easily know what you're looking for and what the goals are. And so then experience in project management is ideal, as well as knowing about federal grants as well. And when staff salary is paid with CDBG funds, we need to approve that beforehand. And the second option is the community hires new staff for purpose of managing the grant. So the advantage to that is the staff is already on hand daily and works closely with local officials in administering the grant. But a challenge would be to find somebody who would be qualified and is willing to do temporary or part-time work. And then the last option, which is typically the most popular one, is when a community enters a contract with a third party, so that's a regional planning commission or a private consultant. And so an advantage is you have a track record with CDBG usually or a similar program, and you can handle the burden of administering a grant. So engineering firms, they can administer a grant, but they can't handle both administration and engineering on the same grant. And the city staff should be familiar with the project requirements, and that's why we have them attend the sub-recipient orientation meeting, so then they know what the administrator should be doing for the project, and making sure that you're handling procurement appropriately and you're contacting the staff to help with that. So the grant administration, the key stakeholders are the recipient, which is the Missouri Department of Economic Development, and they receive the CDBG funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And then the subrecipient is the units of local government, so that's counties and cities and local organizations receiving our funding. And so the people who cannot apply directly are water and sewer districts or nonprofit, but they can apply through their city and county if they would like to. And the administration requirements are arranged between the local government and the organization and a written agreement, but the ultimate compliance duty falls with the people who are applying. And then the contractor is a firm selected by the subrecipient through a rigorous procurement process. Grant administration, the main aspects of that are overseeing subrecipient and contractor compliance, project activities, and CDBG budget amendments if there are any. Contact point with DED. Recommend approval of third-party contracts, purchase orders, invoice payments. You look at those first and then you give those to the compliance specialist. Monitor third-party contracts, make sure that those are being followed closely. Maintain the project files, keeping those organized, making sure you have all the documentation. Make sure you complete the reports for project performance and the final closeout documents. Oversee annual audit requirements. Maintain and control the accounting documents and make sure that the transactions can be traced within the system. And then prepare and submit financial reports if there are any, which typically a grant administrator doesn't do a whole lot on the financial side other than maybe submitting the ACH form at the beginning. And then maintaining the working project files, ideally along with our checklist. Record keeping and monitoring. So the CDBG program record should be maintained for 3 years from the date of HUD closeout, and that could be in electronic form or paper format. And make sure you're documenting the project progress and the efforts to comply. And then create an audit trail, so make sure every transaction can be traced from beginning to end. So sometimes you might have your general account and you might have your CDBG account and you pay out of the general account, but then you get reimbursed into your CDBG account. So you have to be able to see where the transaction is going from beginning to end, so we know where the money is going. And then CDBG monitoring, so desk monitoring, and then on-site monitoring completed by our staff. The level of monitoring is based off the risk assessment, and we recommend monitoring yourself before we come to do the closeout monitoring. So the record keeping and monitoring best practice is following our general monitoring checklist like you see, and then just keeping the files in that order. So then that way when we're doing all of the different checklists, we can just look at the file and its label financial management. We can find all the documents in there and cross those off. So helpful recommendations are when sending an email to CDBG, include the project number and the name in the subject line so we know what it is. And then when uploading the files to the FTP folder, include the project number and the name of the file so we know whose project it is. And collaboration, communication, and joint efforts make a successful project. So all working together, we can make sure that it gets completed and is successful.